So good evening. Welcome to the Modern Exhibition Lecture Series. This is our second lecture as part of this new series, and we're glad to see such a big audience for this group. We're glad you're here. My name is Tiffany Wolf-Smith. I am Curator of Education here at the Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth. Before we get started tonight, just a reminder, turn off the ringer on your phone. We'll know who you are if we hear it. And we are going to save time at the end of the lecture for questions, but we'll also be dealing with these handy mics tonight so that we can get your questions really loud and clear, and also so we can have them on the archive of the lecture. So when we get to the question portions, we're just asking that you raise your hand, and myself and Maria will dash up and down the stairs very gracefully and hand the mics down the aisles for you. So now we'll get on to the good stuff. I hope y'all had the opportunity to spend some time in the Modern Special Exhibition, Diaries of Home, that was so beautifully curated by our chief curator, Andrea Carnes, and our assistant curator, Claire Milliken. If you haven't had the opportunity, I also just want to remind the room that the galleries are open till 8 p.m. and it's free Friday. So you don't even have to pay for a ticket. Just get in there and see the show if you haven't had the chance. Diaries of Home features works by women and non-binary artists who explored the multi-layered concepts of family, community, and home. The works gathered for this show are sweet and painful, gut-wrenching, and so heartwarming. Our artist tonight, Letitia Huckaby, has a special place in the photographic vernacular of this exhibition. I've been in the galleries many times over the last few weeks, and it's been really powerful to hear the audible gasps from guests as they walk around the corner into the East Galleries and enter Letitia Huckaby's space, where they get an immersive experience of an intricate floral wallpaper upon which hangs these ornate wooden frames that encase soft-edged, dark silhouettes. So tonight we'll hear about the journey to those images that started with a research project by the Race and Reconciliation Initiative at Texas Christian University. So joining us for tonight's conversation are artist Letitia Huckaby, former doctoral candidate Marcellis Perkins from Texas Christian University, and our moderator, writer, and curator, Johnica Rivers. Huckaby was selected to create a pair of portraits depicting Charley and Kate Thorp, a formerly enslaved couple who played a crucial role at the AddRan male and female college, which was later named TCU. From its founding in 1873. It's an old school. The portrait project tells TCU's story through diverse portraiture around the campus that commemorates historically marginalized and underrepresented members of the university's community. So important work that they've been doing. Since no photographs of the Thorp family exists, Huckaby photographed their living descendants to craft silhouette portraits that honor the couple's enduring legacy. And the resulting series, A Living Requiem, is what's in the collection of photographs that you'll see on view in Diaries of Home here at the Modern. Letitia Huckaby holds a BA in journalism from the University of Oklahoma in Norman, a BFA in photography from the University of Boston at Lesley, and an MFA in photography from the University of North Texas. So she's been studying all over the place. Her work is rooted in faith, family, and legacy, and acts as a time capsule for the African American experience. Huckaby investigates the relationship between the past and the present, and whether things have changed or remain the same. She builds history into her work through her process and the physical materials. Huckaby's work was recently included right up the street at our neighbor, the Amon Carter Museum of American Art in Fort Worth, in a group exhibition titled Emancipation, the Unfinished Project of liberation. In 2022, the artist's work was featured in 2 solo exhibitions, Letitia Huckaby, Koinonia, which is a new word to me, Koinonia, at the McKay Art Museum in San Antonio, and Bitter Waters Suite at Art League in Houston, which gave her its Texas Artist of the Year award. She was a featured artist in MAP 2020, The Further We Roll, The More We Gain at the Amon Carter Museum of American Art, and State of the Art 2020 at the Momentary and Crystal Bridges Museum. Huckaby has exhibited at the Camden Place Hotel in Cork City, Ireland, McKenna Museum, New Orleans, Phillips, New York, Renaissance Fine Art in Harlem, curated by Deborah Willis, and the Studio School of Harlem. The artist's work is also included in several prestigious collections, including the Art Museum of Southeast Texas, Beaumont, Brandywine Workshop, Philadelphia, the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., the McNay Art Museum, San Antonio, and Samela Lewis Contemporary Art Collection at Scripps College, Claremont, California. Also with us tonight is former doctoral candidate, now Dr. Marcellis Perkins, who he is literally walking the stage tomorrow to get his diploma. I'm so glad he's here for this. I can't believe he said yes. I mean, he's got stuff to do. So Perkins earned his undergraduate degree from the College of the Holy Cross and completed his master's in higher education at TCU. His professional journey includes serving as program coordinator for professional development within TCU's Student Athlete Development Department and as a graduate research assistant for the university's Race and Reconciliation Initiative. Currently, or I guess formally now, he is a graduate assistant in the Office of the Chancellor and the President and chaired TCU's Portrait Project. He is a co-author of A History to Remember, TCU Purple, White, and Black, published by TCU Press in 2023. I also want to do a shout out that we all need to check out his podcast titled Reconcile This, exclamation point. Look that up. It's an academic podcast that is associated with Texas Christian University's Race and Reconciliation Initiative and the university's Studying Slavery Consortium. You can tune in to hear Chair Dr. Frederick Gooding Jr., who's also known as Dr. G, and Marcellis Perkins as they interview guests who share a passion for doing the work of reconciliation. So thank you, Dr. Perkins, again, for being here and being a doctor, Dr. Perkins. We're so glad he's here. And last, but of course not least, our wonderful moderator, Johnica Rivers. Rivers is a writer, curator, and researcher interested in place, public histories, peripatetic ways of being, and Black women's cultural and intellectual production. Her current slate of projects includes work as curator at large of Art on the Land, the Harriet Jacobs Project, a North Carolina division of State Historic Sites Initiative that's working to amplify a fuller, more dynamic story of Harriet Jacobs and her footfalls through place-based art, editorial offerings, and gatherings. It's a wonderful project. Be sure to look that up too. So remember, Reconcile This and the Harriet Jacobs Project. I am so happy to have Rivers here to lead a conversation on the Thorp family's impact and Huckaby's unique approach to capturing their history through art. So please join me in welcoming Letitia Huckaby, Dr. Marcellis Perkins, and Johnica Rivers.
In the spirit of honoring family impacts, I would like for us all to acknowledge Dr. Perkins' family, which fills the first 2 rows of this auditorium, and for those of you who are not familiar, many of us in the room are, this is a Black tradition that you are witnessing. We come out, particularly when it is a doctoral tradition, and I also hear many of you are from Hampton Roads. Yes. I am an alumna of Hampton University and the College of William and Mary, so 7 cities, thank you for coming to Fort Worth. We are going to start our conversation first by contemplating what Tiffany referred to as a body of work that really ushers you into a quiet gasp. Letitia Huckaby specializes in what she calls a quiet punch, right? These subtle but wildly impactful silhouette portraits that go beyond just really anything that I have ever seen. And so I would like for both of you to tell the audience how you came to this work. Letitia, to art, to photography, and then Marcellis, how you found yourself coming from being a doctoral student in higher education to spearheading a project that ultimately leads to what will be one of the most important bodies of contemporary art that we have around narrative change, especially here in Fort Worth.
Oh, can you hear me? I apologize for that. I have no technical skills with microphones, so bear with me. I believe the question was, how did I come to art? And through another art form. I started in dance, actually. From the age of 3 till 18, I did ballet, tap, jazz, and modern, which was my favorite. And my father was in the military and stationed in Oklahoma, and I was able to attend the Oklahoma Summer Arts Institute, which is a statewide camp for artists. And you had to apply, and they took the top 20, and I went in modern dance. And there were youth that were in an orchestra, there were writers, there was actors, there was ballet, there was photography, all different kinds of art forms. And it was the first time that I saw photography that wasn't an advertisement or the news, but watching them take black and white photographs, develop their film, and print it, and I was intrigued. And I wanted to study photography when I went to college, but my parents were like, how are you gonna make a living with that? So I got a journalism degree, which has served me very well, I think. But I went back after I got my first degree and served as their PR person one summer. And there was a photographer there by the name of Christopher James, and he had done this documentary project in India photographing what is, I'll loosely call, death hotels. It's an opportunity for people who don't have a nice place to live to go to this location and have a clean, quiet place to die. And he captured this image of a man as he was taking his last breath. And there was a candle beside him, and you could see the smoke from the candle go in one side of his nostrils and come out the other. And I was like, that's it. I'm studying photography. So I applied to go to school in Boston, which I'd never been before. I'm moving from Oklahoma. Found a roommate online in the 90s. Sold my car and used the money from that to go to school and study in Boston.
I don't think my story is as exciting, but I had already been at TCU for a year working in athletics, and I met Dr. G, and he was the chair for the Race and Reconciliation Initiative. And he gave me a call one day, just randomly, and he was like, hey, are you ready to make real change at TCU? And this is the summer of 2020. I had no idea what he meant by that. He didn't necessarily have a plan for what this would look like, but he was very adamant that what we'll do is always tell the truth. No matter what we have to do, the truth will be kind of the center of our work. And so as I began to build with him and my colleague, Dr. Sylviane Greensword, we really got to do something special with the Race and Reconciliation Initiative, and which was to study TCU's relationship to slavery, racism, and Confederacy. For those that do know TCU and the history of Fort Worth, it has a long-standing history with race relations that are not always beautiful, right? Such as American history. And so with this opportunity to study TCU's relationship with slavery, race, and Confederacy, other projects began to spurt out. And the portrait project had already began to get a little bit of motion before I was offered the position to chair it. But what they wanted to do was look at how portraits on campus also inform the way in which we view our positionality to the campus. And so typically when you go to TCU's campus, it's of older white men who have either through leadership, earned their portrait, or donated a lot of money for financial reasons. But with the portrait project, we wanted to expand it out to think, how can we celebrate folks who have done things beyond leadership and finance through time, energy, and effort? And so as we're building with the Race and Reconciliation Initiative, as I'm developing my skills of research and truth-telling and finding different mediums to do this type of work, being offered the portrait project, I was like, this is the perfect opportunity for me to do something special. I hadn't done anything similar up until this point, but I kind of had an eye for art, like I kind of knew what I was looking at, but I was very adamant on just studying. And so when we were trying to figure out an artist, I was like, I have an idea, but have a committee, so we have to kind of do it that way. But I kind of put her name at the top of everyone's kind of voting sheet. But I was super excited to continue this project of truth-telling. And so doing it through art was a way to really push the academy to think about other ways outside of books and papers that we can ingest information.
I love that, and I love that your colleague asked you, are you ready to make real change? And then the next step in that is, are you ready to do real work? And so I want us to dive into the research practice required to do something like this. Primary source materials, secondary source materials. Dr. Sylviane Greensword spending much time doing field work in Granbury, going through archives. There are so many silences, intentional silences in the archive. Many of us, our ancestors, do not have birth certificates, and that's intentional so that we cannot uncover these stories in order to do work like this. And so scholars who dig very, very deep and take years, sometimes decades, sometimes lifetimes to unveil stories like the Thorps. So can you, from a scholarly background, dive into the research, practice, and process behind the portrait project and getting to answering the question, who are Charley and Kate Thorp?
So as mentioned, my colleague, Dr. Sylviane Greensword, was kind of the spearheading of finding Charley and Kate Thorp. Broadly, with this project, was studying TCU's relationship with slavery, race, and Confederacy. We didn't necessarily have a blueprint. This is a fairly new practice for a lot of universities to kind of delve into the history. And so going in, we kind of build out context. So what's going on during the time period that our university is being founded, just to build that political context. And then going into the archives, you just kind of spend days on days on days on just finding newspaper clips, pictures, diaries, audits, anything that helps tell the story. But a lot of times when, and this is a question I kind of ask my research, what are the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves? And even from an institutional standpoint, what are the stories TCU tells itself about itself or tells others? But in that, the question, and that's where you really find your work, is what stories are not being told? What individuals are kind of being excluded from these major stories? And so when we try to find the gaps of this is who TCU says it is, but here are the pieces that are potentially missing, that's where we try to fill in. And so going into the archives and trying to find how do we make sense of what we see now at this $2 billion institution with a prominent name in the country, where are the pieces that really make this a full circle story? And so when it comes to Charley and Kate Thorp, Dr. Sylviane Greensword found this very small clip in a book where Randolph Clark had wrote extensively about how much Charley meant. And for us, like, we were like, that's gold. Like, we've just struck gold, because rarely does TCU ever talk about its connection to enslavement. And so for them to talk about being in Thorp Springs, Texas, and moving to Waco, and having Black labor be essential to the development of the institution, we knew that there was more there. And so finding that gap and finding the name Charley Thorp, Dr. Sylviane went deeper to find what else did he do? And so we found that he did everything but teach. He was a firefighter, security. His wife also helped nurse sick children. And so in that, we're starting to formulate this story of who they are and how they contributed to the university. And then we went a step further of how do we find their living descendants? And so in that, for a lot of Black folks, our history sometimes gets cut off after a certain point because of the fractures of enslavement, the fractures of Jim Crow. And so to really make this story full and to move beyond point of injury, to not say that they were just formerly enslaved people that worked at university, but how did they also have a life? How did they show their love for each other? Where did their descendants go? And are they connected to the story in this way? And so in finding them, we found that they did not know this history. And so not only did we kind of provide a story or history for TCU, but we also allowed for a family to find their history and their connection. And that was truly healing in real time, not just for us at TCU, but for the Thorp family as well.
This is who we say we are, but this is who we actually are. I think that is a prompt that many institutions should take on, but it also applies to places. I think this project and TCU tackling narrative change also applies to the city of Fort Worth, right? So we have a particular city narrative, and Letitia, you aren't a native, but you've been here for quite a long time, and though you've done projects like this with descendants, with Black freedmen towns, all across the South, this is your first project rooted in a history in Fort Worth. Can you talk about what you did not know before you came into this in terms of TCU, the history of enslavement in Fort Worth, and what your process, once you were brought in by Marcellis, what your research process was and what stories you were able to uncover?
Now I'm afraid of the mic. I knew nothing about Charley and Kate Thorp before Marcellis approached me for this project. So I was really excited because, like you said, I'd been doing work around the South on freedmen's towns and the Black landscape all over the South. And to be able to do a project here was really exciting because I've been here for 20 plus years now. So I guess this is home. So it was exciting. The challenge was that we didn't have images of Charley and Kate Thorp, so how to represent them in a group of images, a pair of images, and it was, how do you do that? You don't know anything about the way they look. But as he said, as Marcellis pointed out, they were able to make a connection with the descendants, and for me, the descendants, they are Charley and Kate Thorp. They're their DNA. They represent them. So the work that Marcellis saw of mine was a body of work on Africatown in Mobile Bay, Alabama, which I was photographing descendants of slaves. So we decided to photograph the descendants of Charley and Kate Thorp and have them as a sort of stand-in for their ancestors, which to me is just like if they had been there.
The photo you see is of one of the descendants who has been involved in the portrait project from its earliest conception, Deborah Duncan Holmes. And I would love for Marcellis and both Letitia, when you uncover a history, particularly when there are living descendants, you kind of open a Pandora's box. There is an emotional response, a cellular response to finding out information about people that you never knew, but that you are genetically connected to. And sometimes those are positive feelings. Grief, unexpected grief may come upon someone. So both from a scholarly standpoint and an artistic standpoint, in that part of the research process, what steps do you take, sensitivities might you have? What was your approach for first reaching out to descendants with this information?
I'll first say the approach is, for me, is language, the use of language, and how do we refer to these individuals in history. And so a lot of times when we look at history or we see what is written on Black people as it relates to enslavement, they're usually referred to as slaves. And so that switch in language from slave to enslaved people, I think, allows for this sensitivity to, one, acknowledge that they are people. Like, outside of the system that they are under, they lived, they laughed, they loved, they had legacies. And so when we approach living descendants and say, hey, we found your actual ancestors, and here are the kind of documents that we've had, is this a conversation that you're willing to pursue with us, right? Because some people, they do not want to have this conversation. Like, the past is the past. It may bring up something for them that they have no idea. And so one asking, is this something that we could pursue? These are some of the things that we found as it relates to our university. May we have your permission, right? Because a lot of times in a lot of sense, they're now speaking for the ancestors in ways that they didn't have. No one asked them permission to work or live here or do this. And so allowing that agency, I think, puts power in their hands. But we then assist, or we kind of do our work in going through finding those gaps. And two stories for me really stand out when I think about how we approach the Thorp family. The first is when we were talking to her about where Charley was buried. We were telling her he was buried somewhere in, I think, South Dallas. And she stops and she said, I was raised in the neighborhood right around the corner from where he was buried. This is the first time I've ever heard of who he is or what this connection is. And she just stopped for a minute. And she said, I have been, as the matriarch of this family, I have been constantly doing the research. And at one point I got to a wall where I couldn't find any more information. You all have unlocked something for me that for years I've been trying to find answers to. And so now we're making this connection for her in her own individual life, but as well as for her family, that they have roots that they can identify. The second story, and I think this one will always stick with me, and I think it was probably the confirmation that this work actually matters, is when the descendants from New Mexico and Arizona got here to Texas for the first time, and they met their descendants, their cousins from Dallas side. And in the archway, if anyone's familiar with TCU, the blue archway, we were all sitting out there. Some of them just got off the plane, and they met for the first time. And the tears from their eyes to find family that, one, they didn't know existed, or two, didn't know how to get in contact with. And so for the first time, this place where their ancestors were treated as less than human, their families being brought back together. That was the confirmation that this work mattered, that it meant something more than any scholarly award or any publication, that real people and real lives are being impacted. Real families are being brought back together. That was healing in real time, not just for them, but as a practitioner, someone doing the work, for me as well.
Go ahead, you want to clap? Go ahead. You know, for me, from the artistic standpoint, I try to move at the pace of the individual that or the group of individuals that I'm photographing. I've had, so in Tulsa, when I was doing a project for the centennial for the race massacre there, I went into that community. And I think that the community, the African-American community's response to me, I can tell, is directly related to how their environment has shaped them. So in Oklahoma, there's a lot of generational trauma in that community. There has not been as much recognition of their rights from the larger community, right? And so there's a lot of pain that gets just passed down through the generations. But if you look at a community like Africatown, where they know who their ancestors were who came over on a slave ship, and they have those histories, and they have passed that down through the generations, and they have pride in knowing that, knowing exactly what part of Africa they're from, and having some of those traditions. They're way more like giving of their history. They want to share it. And I think the Thorp descendants were a mix of both for me. And you can correct me if you think I'm wrong. But they were like celebrating this knowledge of who their ancestors were, like cherishing having that. So really wanting to see this project move forward. At the same time, there was a lot of emotion. It's new information, it's raw. So when we had the unveiling for the portraits, which you see here, TCU, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to do this project. But I was more concerned with the family's response than what TCU thought about it. Okay. This doesn't leave this room. And they were all sitting on the front row, like Dr. Perkins' family is right now. And I was watching them when the sheets came down, and there was a lot of emotion. People just started crying, and I thought, okay, I did my job, because I really wanted to honor Charley and Kate Thorp, and it was the family that was going to tell me whether or not I did a good job. Yeah.
We were talking about this alongside Tiffany in the cafe earlier, and I do this on all of my projects, and I know both of you do as well, but it's recognizing who your real audience is. And oftentimes in our training, we are taught that the museum viewer, that the reader of the academic publication is the audience, where in all of our practices, we understand that the actual audience is first and foremost Black people, and specifically those who have a direct connection to the work that's being made. I want to ask some institutional questions that you can also pass on if there's any conflict, but in the weeks leading up to this lecture, we've had some changes in our national environment, many of which affect higher education, right? And many of which will go on to affect public histories. And locally, the first thing I thought about was the portrait project, and the support that was thrown behind this project came around 2020, 2021, which was a national trend that we are now seeing regress. And so I found myself thinking, what will be the fate of this? And from an artistic standpoint, one of the conflicts I even have internally as an independent curator is in North Carolina, we talk a lot about, we justify like our work with the government department by saying, well, the state has some of our things, right? And so that's why I'm here, because they have the paper. But then I also constantly, when I'm commissioning new work, I actually ask myself, does the state deserve more of my things? Because I am now creating new work, and I am putting it in the care of, while I am there, me, but I will not always be there. So as you uncover these stories, distill them in the form of papers and artworks, what is your relationship or tension with the institution? Oh, Letitia, was that the curveball? Letitia's been telling everybody all day I was going to have a curveball.
Yeah, I knew this was going to happen. She tried to act like she wasn't going to do this, but here we are. So, one, I don't think I'm going to base the work that I create off of what the institution says or does. Like, this is my passion to tell these stories, and I'm going to continue to tell these stories. You made an interesting point, though, when you said you wonder what happens if that becomes a part of the institution. Hopefully, it won't end up in a place where that it will be taken for less than what it is. Right? Like, wherever the work ends up, it will be in a place that will value it. But like you said, we don't have any control over that. We don't know what things are about to happen, and I don't really want to talk about politics. I've been listening to the SPA station on Sirius XM. But yeah, we don't have any control over that. All I can control is me and what I'm going to do, and I'm going to continue to tell the stories and do the work that I've been doing.
Yeah, no, I want to echo that as well. As a younger professional, that's something I started to consider as I saw a lot of the legislation come in and the conversations around higher education, being that across the stage tomorrow in higher, like this is the field that I'm choosing to be in. But what does it mean to be in that field and knowing that you still want to do the work that you want to do, right? And so on one hand, with the Portrait Project, it is of the institution because of funding. And like that's the game within the game, right? We get a lot of funding to be able to get wonderful artists like Ms. Huckaby. Like if this is funded, this is just a project under one department that is probably already underfunded and possibly understaffed, then we can't do these type of projects. And so in that regard, yes, but then having the right people that know the game and know how to say certain things and sell it, I think that's kind of the trick that you also have to have as someone who chooses to work in higher education. I know for me, and echoing as well, I do not plan on changing the way in which I do my work or what my work will look like. Even from the way I get dressed, like today I was thinking, like, how do I want to get dressed for this day? Like I wore a Nas t-shirt because for me, like hip hop is the work that I want to reflect. Like the honest, raw truth, this thing that disrupts systems and is more reflective of the culture that you believe in. So yeah, like we're not going nowhere. Like we're going to do our work, we're going to do it the best we can until someone says we can't.
So now I'd love to get into, you have an idea, you do the research, Letitia's on board. How do we go from an idea through the artistic process to end up with the silhouette portraits? And I have had the honor and privilege to physically be with Letitia when she's making work. Sorry.
For that image.
And I'll provide some context for this photo. So this was November, first week in November 2023 in Edenton, North Carolina, photographing. This particular project has some similarities. In the Thorp case, there were no family photographs. In this case, the subject, Harriet Jacobs, had no living descendants because she only had 2 children, neither of which had children before they were deceased. And so we framed the women of the Fannie A. Parker Women's Club, which is a subsidiary of the Colored Women's Federation, and they run Black Edenton, North Carolina, as the descendants. And so I got to actually observe Letitia, and I would love for her to walk you through the process of how the silhouette portraits come to be. So I started doing these silhouette portraits in grad school, and I see some of my UNT people back there. Hey! And for me, the silhouette is a reflection of history and faith. History in that all of my images end up printed on cotton fabric. And so when I say cotton, and you look at me, you look at the rest of us up here, you think about certain things, right? And then you can't see the figure without the light that's behind them. I'm a person of faith, and that's an important thing in the African American community. So it started as that in graduate school. And at first, I was just using plain white sheets. And my mom, who was raised in Louisiana, grew up on a dairy farm. And the only thing they bought from the store was flour. And her mom would take those, my grandma would take those sacks that came in cotton sacks that had these floral patterns on them. She would take those and make clothes for the kids. And my mom would tell me about this, and it was just like mind-blowing. So I was able to find some of the sacks. You can Google and find just about everything. I found some sacks and started printing directly onto those, but they're small because nobody's carrying around, a 50-pound bag of sugar or flour anywhere, and I wanted to make bigger pieces and photograph people. So I started sourcing vintage bed sheets. And so what you see up here behind me is an old bed sheet that's hung on a light stand or background stand, and then I put the figure behind the sheet and I cast their shadow onto the sheet and photograph it from the other side. Sometimes it's a collaborative process. Sometimes not. I often I'll bring a lot of sheets and ask somebody if they see one they like. I've heard, I'm an Omega, so I want purple and gold, or this looks like one my mom used to have. I'll use this one, or I love roses.
And sometimes they just say whichever one you think is best. And so I'll pick something that's different than everything else I've already photographed in that group. So it's a conversation back and forth with the sitter, and very casual, and it doesn't take a long time, as you know, to get the image. And then that work gets printed onto plain white cotton fabric, and upstairs, when you see the show, those images are in black and white, but the ones that we did for TCU were in color. So yeah, that's how I get those images.
Can you talk about the conversation between the silhouette, but also how you choose to frame it? For those of you who've seen Letitia's work before, you may have seen some framed in vintage sewing loom embroidery hoops. I know for the Africa Town project, you had custom frames made that could reflect the wood of the Clotilde ship as closely as possible. So you're bringing in the descendant, but you're also bringing in the environment that the ancestor would have experienced, whether that's, I think about the floral sheets, ecological, home life. So can you talk about, because this is your first time with this type of framing, to my knowledge, can you talk about what led you to this specifically?
So for the frames for this group of images, I was really looking at Baroque memorial brooches. So it used to be popular a long time ago that when you lost a loved one, you would take some of their hair and put it in a locket and keep it. It reminds me of our practice with memorial T-shirts, right, as a way to sort of remember that individual. And so I was looking at a lot of these designs for brooches. So really all the frames are based off of a brooch. Some of them are round, some of them are oval. And I drew out the designs that I wanted, and I worked with Black Forest CNC here in Fort Worth to CNC route out these designs at the size that they are. And I love using materials that are often overlooked, like, old sheets. So the wood is just some birch plywood. But when you cut into it, you can see all the glued layers, and it makes it look more than what it actually is, right? Like it's just some cheap junk wood. When you carve it and you pair it with all these other elements, it becomes, to me, very similar to like an old master's painting with the frames on them, the big heavy ones you would see in Europe, right? So yeah, that is new. Up until this point, I've always used like vintage embroidery hoops, or oversized, that I had somebody make embroidery hoops, or referencing enslaved ships. And then also the wallpaper, which is a huge part of this experience, was sourced from Edenton, North Carolina. When I was working on the Harriet Jacobs project with Johnica, I had the pleasure of going into a plantation that the state had just acquired as a historical site. Literally, I think they had just gotten the keys 2 days before.
No, you were the first. The keys were exchanged that morning. And this is a plantation that up until that day was still owned by the descendants who were the original enslavers. And it's called Hayes Plantation in Edenton, North Carolina. And so we looked at Letitia. Someone called and they were like, "We got the keys." And so I said, "Hey, Letitia." And the reason it's, like you said, is it a good sentiment? Is it a negative sentiment? But it is going into the archives, right? So there were like first edition, the library where she found this literally on the table filled with dust, not taken. It was a first edition copy of Huckleberry Finn. And I was like, so there's this kind of field day that a researcher can have.
It was very surreal. The house, let me paint you a picture. It's on the bay. It's 3 stories high with balconies on both sides. A long oak tree-lined driveway up to the structure with a circular flower bed out front filled with roses, and gardens all the way around the house. And when you go through the space, there's still paintings and busts, and a wooden round library with this dark stained wood, and 3 different kitchens from 3 different time periods that the house existed, and old 4-poster beds still in the bedrooms, and just, so it was a bit overwhelming. But in this library off to the side, there was this room with just a bunch of stuff. It must have been like a storage space, or as the family was moving out, they just pushed a bunch of stuff into this room. And there was a piece of fabric, which became the wallpaper, that was on like a wood stretcher. And I don't know if they used it for a canopy over a bed or if it was hanging on the wall, but this is the fabric. And while we were there, we were staying with a woman who is also related to these plantation owners, and her ancestor actually brought over slave ships. And she asked me, how did it feel to be in this space? And she practices restorative hospitality. So we had a very genteel tea on the porch. It was very nice. But she asked me, how did it feel to be in this space? And I told her that I felt almost like I was trespassing, like I shouldn't be there, like I could get in trouble. And Michelle, who was over this project with Johnica Lanier, said, well, let me tell you this. She said, when you go into this place and you see the wood, I want you to look at your skin tone and think about, it was probably people who look like you that built the stuff and cleaned the stuff. So you have every right to be in that space as anyone else. So then I kind of felt a little different. So I thought, I need to repurpose the use of this fabric and bring it in as this backdrop to the work that we were doing with the descendants of Charley and Kate Thorp, as a way to sort of like take ownership of something from a plantation, even though it's like way across the country in North Carolina, and use it to help shine a light on this family and their story.
On one hand, it's way across the country in North Carolina, but if you understand the intrastate slave trade, so we have transatlantic, and then we have states like Texas, slaves were walked from places specifically like North Carolina. If you're familiar with the Gee's Bend quilters, the original Gee's Bend quilters come from a Gee's Bend family that was walked to Alabama from North Carolina. So I think it's impossible to tell a story like this without, you're telling a story specific to the Thorps, specific to TCU, specific to Texas and Granbury, but it's still a story of the Black South, right? Because it's all interconnected. And I think for me, and I think for you as well, being in that home, which you lose that opportunity with places I was reading, like with Granbury, a lot of the built environment with Thorpe Springs is gone, right? But to literally step into, not to the archive, but to the place, and one detail I'll just add to what Letitia said, is she didn't just sit down and talk to Susan English. She slept, I've slept there many times, but this was Letitia's first time. She slept in that house. And that home has the original furniture. Susan can pull out Confederate uniforms and tell you about her ancestors. And we know for a fact, similar to if we still had the homes in Granbury and the built environment, you can, as an academic, as a researcher, as a writer, stand there and based on stories say, oh, wow, Katie Thorp more than likely stood in this living room. And where Letitia slept, we know for a fact that both Harriet Jacobs and her grandmother, Molly Horniblow, spent time in that home. Dr. Perkins, how does it feel, one, to hear that? Two, my actual question is, as the lead on the art aspect of this project, as you said, you knew Letitia was the one. How did you know that Letitia was the artist to bring this archival and public history to life?
To answer the first question, it's still resonating. So I haven't gotten used to it yet. It might take a while. But how did I know she was the one? I had kind of heard her name. If you're in Fort Worth, and this is a museum I would come to on Fridays by myself just to burn time or go to cheap dates. And so I've seen her, telling the truth, right? Okay. I had seen her work around, and there was something just intriguing to me. When I would see it, it would make me want to ask more questions. Like, what am I looking at? Who am I looking at? What is their story? How does this story kind of fill in the gaps of whatever's been missing before? And so when we're thinking about what we wanted to do at TCU, and one, not having any pictures of Charley and Kate Thorp, this idea of using silhouettes, I felt like, oh, this is something here. But two, being that she was local, she was right here in the city of Fort Worth, I think also helped draw in and really sell this idea of like, how do we as TCU invest into local arts and invest in artists who are here doing work that is groundbreaking. We don't have to go all the way to California. We don't have to go all the way to New York. Like, we have wonderful, talented people right in our backyards that are often overlooked by TCU or other major institutions. I think we were talking before that a lot of times you do a lot of work outside and then home wants to acknowledge you, as opposed to like the home base lifting you up and being that champion for you. So in that, like those things of her artistic style, her being close, and then having those early conversations and seeing just how genuine she was about this work. My fear was that we'll get an artist that just wanted the check. We'll get an artist that just wanted the publication. But she genuinely cared about how the family felt first, TCU second. And to me, that was important because in my mind, we were on the same page. The family's feeling is first, TCU can be second or third on that list.
And for our last question before we open it up to you all for questions, what is next? I know that the TCU Portrait Project is a multi-year project based here at TCU in Fort Worth. I was reading that a book, like a culmination book of the multiple years of the Portrait Project might come. And also the project, often you commission portraits of alumni, living people with legacies at TCU. So what's next for you and the Portrait Project? And then we would love to hear from you, Letitia, on what's next in your practice or what else you are working on.
So we'll continue the Portrait Project. I'm proud to say that TCU, from the chancellor down to the president to the board of trustees, have really put an effort to maintain and continue this project. So the funding for it will always come from upper admin, and so they pledged that. They set aside budget for us to continue doing this. Every 2 to 3 years, we'll kind of do some research, put out a list of names of who we want to potentially highlight, vote, find an artist, hopefully potentially local artists, to continue to commission these type of portraits, and portraits that are outside the typical norm. This portrait does not look like anything that you typically see at a college campus. You know, they're not looking at you, they're not oil, large gold paintings. Like, this was completely left field, and so being that this is the energy that we're starting with, we want to continue with that. Portraits that are changing the landscape, showing the many shades of purple at TCU, but also getting artists whose work reflects that. Thought-provoking, heartwarming, heart-changing, things that make you think and feel at the same time. And so the university is behind it, and as individuals, there are a collection of individuals who are also willing to put in that work to hold the university accountable, to say like, hey, this is the project that you all said you're backing. Here are the receipts, here are the communications, here are the documents, here are the contracts. We'll continue to move it forward in that regard.
I'm glad you asked that question, Johnica, because you're going to help me with it. So I'm thinking about two things. One is working with presidential plantations, because they have like descendants associations on both sides, the enslavers and the enslaved. So I'm excited to work on that. And then the other one is, while I was working in Edenton at Hayes, I was given the opportunity to photograph in a sharecropper's cottage, and I want to delve a little deeper with that. So, Johnica.
I am here at your service. The work of my life is to be in collaboration with Black women artists. And just for context, it is a person whose family had been enslaved at Hayes, and the descendants, up until this man passed away about 3 months ago, continued to work at as sharecroppers and then in whatever modern jobs it takes to maintain hundreds of acres and multiple houses. And his wife died probably 15 years ago. And when we went in the home, he had moved to assisted living. He had not moved a single item in this home. The daughter's bedroom was an early 90s teen situation, and it was a phenomenal, I would say, like living archive to walk into. And I'm so glad that Letitia, as a curator, I wonder if Andrea does this, sometimes you take someone somewhere as a little bit of bait, right? You're hoping, you don't want to give them the idea, but you are hoping that they in their practice will walk into this space and be inspired. And so I knew you, I was hoping that you would really, really be interested in formally photographing the space. So thank you.
The bait has been taken.
Amen. Ready for questions?
Oh, Andrea. I was just giving everybody a chance to think. First of all, to all three of you, I want to say thank you so much for your generosity tonight and sharing with us, and also to say that I can't speak for any other institution, but since I work at this one and have for a long time, I will say that choosing people who stay true to themselves as artists and writers is at the top of our list of things to do, in addition to, having visual appeal and other things. But it's important, and it's important work, and we wouldn't want any of you to change a thing. But what I wanted to ask you about, Letitia, is there's such a poetics to what you do, and we've talked about this before. You elevate materials like the wood, and also the sitters we all know what a silhouette is, but there's something that makes you stop and look at these just as deeply, I think, as you would a very detailed frontal portrait of someone. And also, you're not a straightforward photographer, and nothing you do you're slippery in this way. And I just wonder how you find those poetics, it's a weird question in a way, but do the metaphors just come in through your process, or how do you think about that?
I work really slow. I'm one of those artists that kind of feels my way through a project. So I'll have like a general idea, but I'm not one of those that's like, it's got to be like this, it's got to be like that, it's going to look this way. At the very beginning, I listen to music, I read stuff while I'm working on a project, and all that kind of shifts me as I'm moving. So maybe that's what people are responding to in the work. They're hearing the music, maybe they're hearing the poetry, they're hearing whatever it is that I'm absorbing while I'm making the work, or the connections with the sitters or the people, they spark things. So I move very slowly through a project, and when I have an emotional pull in a certain direction, I always follow it. It's always more work, but I always follow it, right? And that has served me really well to be really fluid in the way that I work. And I'm really inspired by the Deep South. And when I say that, I mean things like the color of the Deep South. I mentioned I was in a military family, but my family, my father's family is from Mississippi, and my mom, I said she's from Louisiana. So whenever we were on vacations, we would go to those places, and oftentimes, I was born in Germany, so a lot of times we were coming from a totally different world into the Deep South. And so for me, the Deep South became a very romantic place, like to see the way the kudzu takes over the landscape, or the color of the red clay after a rain, or that smell, or, the mist hanging in the trees, or the color of all the wood clap houses in New Orleans. All these things really influence my work. So I feel like you can see that somehow. Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Hey, y'all. My question is for all three of you. With working in traumatic and sensitive situations, do you guys have your own personal practices to help balance being in those emotionally tough things, or do you just kind of don't?
That's such a great question. I'm still trying to figure out what that looks like for me. It changes from meditation, walking, completely disconnecting from anything related to whatever I'm working on research-wise. So I'm still trying to figure out what that answer looks like for me. If you have any recommendations, I would love to hear from you. I'll switch it over to you.
Yes, I have all of the things, including a spreadsheet of all of my vitamins, but a just tiny example, when we did the project with Letitia in North Carolina, we, unveil things in my practice in a layered approach, so the descendants have their own opening with the community. Then the next week, we unveiled 70 Black women who are already immersed. And so that audience, you don't have to explain anything to, right? You can just get to the meat. And that's also a healing way. So the first time Letitia saw that installation, she was cocooned around 70 Black women, scholars, artists. We also had an acupuncturist on site. So the viewer who is also having this somatic experience could have a therapeutic hand in helping. Lodging is important for me. So Letitia knows this, all my projects, we pair this level of rigor and excavation of trauma, if you will, with a luxury experience, right? So then you are going to the Umstead Hotel, which is literally ensconced in a forest. And for me, I'm not coming out of my room for 2 to 3 days, right? After a project, after install, I'm probably after Sojourn, I don't think I actually spoke to a human for 4 days, to be honest. So it's very much a paying attention to your nervous system, because as a curator and a writer, I'm like carrying the story, but also the logistics, right? Which is its own weight. And then I'm sure Letitia can speak to the weight of you've gone through this body of work, but also maybe the anxiety or anticipation of the unveiling to the descendants, but also to the audience.
Yeah, I would have to say I try to be present. I try to just feel whatever's happening. I do believe in self-care. I'm looking at trying to get one of those scalp spa things next, but just being present in that moment and being slow, I think. So when we did the project, I took my 16-year-old daughter with me because I knew it was going to be all these fabulous women there. And so I was really connecting with her through this trip and literally picking flowers as we were walking. And then she said, like, the first time I saw my installation was with a whole mass of people, which normally I get to see it before. So it was really, really emotional. But my daughter was there with me, and so I'm a mother first, so I'm thinking about her and what the experience is like for her. So it's just about staying present, and I would say self-care.
So first of all, thank you so much for this conversation. My question is, because this is a work of very monumental scale, and there are so many different portraits involved. For both of you, what was the process involved? Because you're saying some of the descendants were even in Arizona and New Mexico. So what was the process like tracking down all the descendants and then contacting them to work with you for this piece? Thank you.
Thank you, Beckett. I love Beckett. I'll let Marcellis answer this one too, because Marcellis is the one that organized everything, but all of the people who are photographed in this part of the project are from Dallas and Fort Worth. So the ones out of state are not included in this, but maybe there will be a part 2 at some point. So TCU handled all the arrangements of gathering individuals for the photo shoots.
Yeah, so the picture that Johnica showed earlier of Deborah Holmes holding that photo, she was really the main contact for me. Anything that I needed, Miss Holmes, super sweet lady, lives in Dallas, so I'll email her, text her, Zoom, and say like, hey, we're trying to do a photo shoot. And as the matriarch of that family, when she calls, everyone responds. They showed up to Fort Worth. And if you've never driven from Dallas to Fort Worth during 6 o'clock rush hour traffic, it is hell. And so through hell or high water, she got them to come out here and allowed us to really connect with them in that way.
Let's get one more question back here, and then I would love a question from a family member, and I see down here, I think we'll finish with a family member.
All right. This is such a fabulous project in every way. Congratulations to all of you. The question that I have is, how is TCU kind of engaging the student body? I don't see very many students of color. I live near the university. I drive by it all the time. How can they be engaged and understand the importance of this and hopefully be influential in the future to carry on this kind of work within the university after they graduate?
As someone that works in higher education, I never want to put this type of work on the students. And so we invite not necessarily students of color, black and brown students, but white students as well. I think it's equally, or sometimes more important, that they too come to these events, engage in these conversations, and not make our students become their professors. And so we give them the option through invitation. And if they choose to graduate and never want to do this work again as black students, they have every right to. For 4 years, they have to kind of figure out navigating TCU as sometimes being the only black person in their class or in their dorms, and being the voice and having to reason and sometimes speak for their entire race. That's a job within itself that they don't get paid for. So if they choose not to, that they have every right to do so. But the invitation to be open to all students, to say like, hey, this is the work of all of us. You're all welcome in to have these conversations and have these dialogues. And that's something that I try to encourage, that, we all don't know. And this is a learning environment. So as you learn from me, I will learn from you as well as we share these perspectives. So that's kind of my approach, and that's TCU's approach for some individuals. I can't speak for the entire institution because that's a conversation regarding recruiting and then financial aid, and then if TCU has the programs that actually you want to be in, is it the environment that you want to be in? So I think there are individuals that are attempting to do the work of recruiting diverse student populations, but TCU has a lot of work to do, and I don't know if we'll see those type of large leaps in the next 2 to 3 years, especially as DI programs are being cut. Luckily, TCU is private, but there are a lot of students who are looking to go out of state or not come to the state of Texas just because they have a lot of uncertainty of how their education will be valued and how they as an individual will be treated as such an institution that has a name like TCU.
Hi. Marcellis, I heard you say that the university, you were charged with delving into the connection between the building of this institution, which became Texas Christian University, and the influence that people who couldn't attend had on its, the building, the literal building and running of it. So, what has been the response of TCU to what you have uncovered? And how do you see that moving forward from this project on?
Good question, Amirio. Jeez. We've gotten we got a lot of great reception, better than I think what a lot of people anticipated. And so when I would tell people, especially in Fort Worth, and I've done a lot of work in historic South Side, Morningside, Hillside, and those are historic black neighborhoods of Fort Worth. And when I tell them I'm at TCU in this work, they're kind of skeptical of like, TCU let you do that? TCU let you get away with that? And so, having that support, I think, means a lot. And for those that go into the Harrison and they see this portrait, the pictures that you see here really doesn't do it justice. These are large portraits. Like they're up to my chin, and I'm 6'3", 6'4" on a good day. So they take up space. And so when people come in, they stop. They have to take a minute to say, like, what am I looking at? What am I processing? And I've never heard anyone say a bad, like, these are beautiful. Like, these really change the space. And that's good on the surface level, but I wanted to change the culture of TCU. I think art disrupts the system, and art should be a reflection of the culture. And even if it's like this small insertion into the wall, right, you may miss it, but for those that actually stop and look at it, they're forever changed because they can't unsee it. And once they look at the portrait and then they ask the questions of who they are, now they have information that they can't unlearn, they can't unhear. And so those are the small steps that will kind of move into using the portrait project to disrupt and change and renew or make a new culture at TCU where we actually have these conversations. Even if it's not direct in the classroom setting, through art. Even if these portraits aren't speaking to you, they're still speaking to you. They're still saying something. And for those that are looking, they're also listening.
Okay, I know I said that was the last question, but we have one more Marcellis champion who wants to ask a question, and we'll finish on this.
Letitia, outstanding and amazing work. Awesome. From hearing about it from its inception, it's been truly amazing to watch. Johnica, thank you for moderating. This question is for Dr. Perkins. In looking at, and it's a question for the practitioner, and looking at what you've researched, right, which was the past, dealt with the family, which is the present, and hopefully told a story for people that are going to come on and look on this for years to come, which is the future. And being a truth teller from your background, right? Grandmother had 14, daughters, sons. You had 14, people within your family. You were number 14, playing high school basketball, and so on and so forth. What reflections did it bring you in doing this work? What did it tell you about somebody that, looking within your family, you see the future, and you see the past, and you often think about the past. Somebody who's presently, sitting and looking on their family while also doing your work, and then somebody who in the future is groundbreaking and going forward. What reflections and thoughts has this work brought you, and maybe some of the louder thoughts?
Trey, this is not what we talked about, man. No, that's an excellent question. There's a quote that I often say: I come as one, I stand as 1,000, I can because they did. And I'm going to be honest, this was really hard to do today because I've never had my family sit this close while I'm trying to talk. There was a lot of times like I can't make eye contact. But I think them sitting this close and seeing this work and seeing some of the things I've been able to do, it's always been in the back of my mind that this work is always beyond you. Like we don't operate, we don't live in silos. That who I am today and the work that I do is everyone that's sitting in this seat, and those that there are some that aren't here. There's something that they have instilled in me or given me that I'm trying to pour out and I'm trying to reflect, and whether it's the written work or how I teach a class. And so as we think about these projects of storytelling and the art of storytelling, and particularly for Black people, how important storytelling is, it is how we keep our ancestors alive, and it is through our works. And a lot of times, we can't say thank you enough. Like, they traveled all the way from the East Coast to come here. I can't say thank you enough, but I hope that my work reflects my gratitude. And so when thinking about doing a portrait project and talking to living descendants and trying to help tell their story, it is also an act of gratitude. And so that is all I have at the bottom of my heart, is immense level of gratitude for people who have done things for me, whether I know or I don't know, that allow me to do the things that I'm doing now. And it is my hope that I stand as someone's 10,000 one day, that because I did, they can. And so I think, when we do these works, we try to continue that type of energy, whether we know it or not. There are things about us from our grandparents, our great-grandparents that we do, that we say that impact and influence who we are. And if we can just continue those type of good deeds and pass on those recipes of life, then I think the work is successful in that regard. And so when people go to TCU and they look at these portraits, my name is nowhere near it. Everything points back to Ms. Huckaby, and that is the way in which I want to do my work. But it's there. It is felt. Someone will see it, and then hopefully they'll know that it is a reflection of good energy, whether you know the name or not. And that's why I say I come as one, I stand as 10,000. I can because I did. I don't know all of my 10,000. We don't know all the people who have done something to have paved our way, but the only way we can say thank you is to do the work, the good work, the continuing work of trying to make this world a better place, if that makes sense.
Well, that's our evening. What a great way to end. I'm glad, Trey, thanks for asking the question. And thank y'all for being here.